Hello, this is Professor Neil Hamilton from the Drake University Agricultural Law Center. I want to welcome you to today's installment of our series, Law for Landowners, 10 Things You Should Know. Our topic today is 10 things you should know about Iowa's soil conservation law. The first thing to remember is that soil conservation has been an issue that we've been dealing with in Iowa for generations, and ever since the 1930s. Iowa enacted the Soil Conservation District Law, and every county in the state has a Soil and Water Conservation District Commission. It's run by locally elected commissioners, and the commission's responsible for working with landowners to try to implement soil conservation plans on their farms. A second thing to understand about Iowa's soil conservation law is that a chapter in the Iowa Code, Chapter 161A, establishes all of the laws relating to soil conservation. An important provision in that chapter is 161A-43, which provides that it's the duty of all landowners in the state of Iowa to actually protect their soil. And all of the counties in the state, through the district commissioners, have established a maximum soil loss limit. In Iowa, that's considered to be 5 tons per acre per year, which is believed to be the level at which soil will replace itself under normal farming circumstances. The third point to recognize is that as these districts have established the idea of maximum soil loss limits, then landowners and farmers are adopting soil conservation plans which have the goal of trying to make sure that any soil losses are below that level. Much of the work of the districts, and all of them include professional soil conservation staffers, and they also work with the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is often located in the same office. And those staff people are working to try to help landowners and farmers implement conservation. The fourth point to recognize is that if a landowner or a farmer believes that their land is being damaged by soil loss or erosion that may be coming from a neighboring property, the law provides a method whereby they can register a complaint with the local commissioners who will actually come out and investigate the complaint to see what's happening. Fifth, the Iowa law establishes a fairly detailed process for how those investigations are to operate. And the law even allows the district commissioners to investigate properties on their own motion if they have reason to believe that excessive soil loss and erosion is occurring. In particular, if they believe that that erosion is affecting other public property or impacting conservation practices that have been installed with public funding. The sixth point is to recognize that if commissioners determine that excessive soil loss is occurring, then there's a process whereby they can work with the landowner and farmer to try to reduce the soil losses. The first step is for there to be an administrative determination if there's been a violation of the soil loss standards. And if there has been, then the farmer or landowner is notified of this and given a period of time to actually adopt conservation practices which will help reduce the soil losses they're experiencing. The seventh point to remember is that if the landowner fails to actually take action to correct the soil losses, the district commission actually has the authority to order them to take certain steps. And that order can actually identify conservation practices they may need to take, such as taking a erosive, hilly side field out of production or putting in terraces, for example, to control soil and water runoff. The eighth point to recognize is that the Iowa courts have upheld the constitutionality of this law and of the idea that landowners can be ordered to actually take steps to protect their soil. Now, one of the questions that can come up is who's going to pay for that? Under the Iowa law, Landowners who are ordered to implement conservation practices are required to be provided with cost sharing to help them pay for it. But the underlying question of whether or not the state has an interest in the soil such that landowners and farmers can be expected to protect it was actually decided by the Iowa Supreme Court and held that yes, the state does have that power and responsibility because the soil is a vital resource that we all depend on. The ninth idea to keep in mind is that while the Iowa Soil Conservation Law and the work of the soil and water conservation districts functions separately, it is also associated with the work of the USDA and the NRCS. As I mentioned before, you often will find the District Commission and the USDA offices co-located together. And for people who go into the USDA office to see about the availability of federal conservation programs, it'll look like a seamless process in that you can't necessarily distinguish between who might be a state employee or who might be a federal employee. The point is, there's an elaborate team and a set of programs that are made available to try to help farmers and landowners protect their land and to conserve our soil and protect our water quality. The 10th and final point to keep in mind is to recognize that participation in federal farm programs, such as submitting your land to participate in the Conservation Reserve Program, or obtaining cost-sharing funding under something like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, those programs are voluntary. The state law concerning protecting our soil and establishing a duty on all landowners is not voluntary. That requirement is mandatory and can be applied to any land and any landowner, regardless of whether or not you may be participating in other federal conservation programs. The point to remember here is that the soil is a vital resource for Iowa and for Iowa landowners and farmers. And the law has established important procedures and standards for trying to help make sure that landowners and the state are able to protect that soil to sustain us into the future. This has been Professor Neil Hamilton with today's episode of Law for Landowners, 10 Things You Should Know About Iowa's Soil Conservation Law.